videos that we'll be putting up on things that matter in relation to things that do matter to you and to myself and to my partner in crime, Avery. So welcome to Things That Matter. And of course, with me today, I've got none other than the great, the fantastic, the humorous, the enjoyable, the debonair, the happy, the joyous, the great, the one and only Avery Hildrich. Hello, Avery. How are you, mate?
I'm good. How are you? For the first time in quite some time, I had a good night's sleep last night. Valium induced, but it was a good night.
Good. I'm glad to hear that, because I know that you've been struggling a wee bit, haven't you, with
I have.
Your sleep stuff, and
Yeah.
and that's because as an intelligent individual, you have heaps of shit turning over in your brain almost every minute of every day.
My brain never stops.
Yeah, I've had the same problem, but I don't seem to have it as bad as you do. You definitely have a different brain to mine.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to start by just talking about what's happening in the United States at the moment. And our topic, of course, as everybody can see, is the United States is stuffed. And it's not necessarily about having a go at the US specifically. It's actually about understanding that what's happening in the United States is something that could be happening in any place in the world, and certainly could be happening and has happened from time to time in terms of the way we treat Indigenous people and immigrants to the country of Australia. And we know that immigrants and Indigenous people have been treated very poorly, Indigenous people particularly by the police. And we may remember that some years ago, the deaths in custody issue was one that was of primary concern to Indigenous people. And recently, we've had a finding in relation to a Palm Island dispute that occurred a few years ago, where a Aboriginal person was murdered, actually while in care, and those particular people on that island were awarded something like $371 million. And justifiably so. So it's not that what's happening in the United States is unique to the United States. We all have that problem. Racism is a problem around the world that we all need to find the space to be able to deal with, confront, acknowledge that it's happening, and hopefully do something about it. So I'll just bring Avery in to talk to us about his version of what's happening in the United States. We'll carry the conversation further from there. Go, Avery.
Okay. In the United States, you're right. The way they treat immigrants is atrocious. The way they treat people that were born there, whose skin is not white, is atrocious. And as far as immigrants are concerned, the blacker your skin, the less likely you are to be treated well. And
Yes.
yeah, and they've had 400 years of, the past 400 years ago is when the first African slaves were brought in. They didn't decide to emigrate there. They were kidnapped from their villages. They were captured by Arab raiders and sold off to Europeans, British, Dutch, Spanish, taken across the Caribbean into South America and into North America. And ever since then, black people have been grossly mistreated. The US Constitution it said that all men are created equal, didn't mention women, and when it talked about black men, they were 3/5 of one white person.
And there's something that's been quite interesting that's come up recently is, and this particular, if anybody is interested in Planet America, which is a show on the ABC, I think they hold a Wednesday nights and they have a fireside chat on a Friday. If anybody's interested in having a look at the Australian version of what's happening in the United States, it's worth a good look. And they had a Aboriginal man. I don't know if you saw Planet America this week, have you?
No,
Did you ever watch it?
Never seen it.
Okay, well, there you go. Something that I can suggest that Avery does. But I suggest it to the rest of you, if you're watching this too, to look at Planet America on ABC Australia, because they had a African-American individual talking about voting rights in the US. And to my surprise, if you have a conviction or a felony for something as simple as driving without a driver's license or an expired license, you then are not permitted to vote in the United States. Can you believe that, Avery?
Can I believe it? Yes. Because of the, as I said, the 400-year history of racism in the United States. I was just talking with Sasha earlier on today. The way the policing is done in the United States from the get-go has been they've had sidearms packed by their side, and the American police response to any sort of a problem seems to be haul your gun out. They're going to do a traffic stop because the guy's got a broken tail light. They pull the guns out.
There have been, Avery, there have been some fantastic conversations or in relation to the George Floyd murder.
Yeah, Floyd,
George Floyd murder. And there was something I noticed on Facebook that was this young woman giving the most emphatic, profound version of what actually has happened and what it's like for African Americans. And I saw something earlier too that talked about African Americans, like just trying to help us to imagine what it would be like every day to wake up wondering whether you're going to be pulled over by a policeman because of the colour of your skin, whether you're going to be accused of a crime that you didn't commit, if you're going to be beaten, and even if you're going to be killed. And I, as a white person, could not imagine that, but I certainly do need to acknowledge that here in Australia there are certainly Indigenous people who feel the same.
Yeah, here in Australia, it seems to be exactly the same as the United States in that if your skin is not white, then your crime is that you are guilty of being black. And if there's a crime in your area and the cops see you walking down the street and you happen to be Aboriginal or an African American, you're going to be the first one that's going to get pulled over because you kind of resemble the sort of person that would have committed that crime.
Yeah, and I saw some lovely African American people talk about what that experience is like for them, and this particular person that they interviewed on Planet America was a man who himself was incarcerated for crimes that he'd committed, and of course he can't vote, but in the United States system he can't vote, and because even though once he got out, he tells this lovely story, which is actually on the Fireside Chat, which was Friday night version, and he talks about how he decided that, so he went to a homeless shelter, community college, and eventually got a law degree. And even though is the most amazing man, and he's been voted as one of the most 100 influential persons in the world, this person cannot vote in the United States.
In many of the states, you can't vote if you go to jail. You're put in prison for the duration. And then when you come out, you can't vote for the rest of your life because you're a convicted felon.
That's right. That's what I'm saying.
You've done the crime, you've done the time, and now we're going to continue to treat you as though you're still a criminal in jail, despite the fact that you did your 5 years, your 10 years, whatever it happens to be, in prison.
That's
the United
right.
States, I don't know if you know this, is got something like 5% of the world's population, about 350 million people, and it's got 25% of the world's prison population.
That's right. And it's got more people incarcerated than China does.
Yep.
That has, 3 times, 4 times the population, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, it's getting on for 5 times.
And the amount and the number of African Americans that are incarcerated far outweighs and exceeds that of other Americans.
Yeah.
So I guess our topic though is, which I guess this is all related to, is the United States is stuffed.
Yeah.
And it's stuffed in 2 areas, Avery, as I see it, and I'll just ask you for your comments in a second. but it's stuffed because they have a moron as a president, and as each day goes by, that moron becomes a bigger moron than the day before, and they're stuffed because the racial issues that have been present in the United States have not seemed to have been mitigated or minimised in any way. That they are still prevalent, and that before we started this feed, I was told that, was it you that told me, or was it Dee, that today there'd been 7 more shootings of African Americans in the US.
Yeah, Dee would have told that to you, not me.
Dee said that to me. Yeah. At my age, you just get confused, mate. But the point is that it's still going on at an incredible rate. Now, I don't agree with the looting and the destruction of property and the threats and the violence that seems to have ensued as a result of what's happening to George Floyd. But I do understand, as best as I can as a white person, what this particular situation is like for African Americans, and I think we need to show some solidarity for them in relation to what's happening right now. What do you think?
Yeah, quite agree about that. Excuse me. There's a thought that popped into my head when you were talking there, and it's just gone. Something to do with age, I guess.
We've got to stop using that excuse, Avery.
Yeah. What the hell was it? I can't remember. It'll probably come to me in a few minutes on a from a totally different way out of left field. The attitude to crime in the United States. I know what it was. I was going to say the rioting that's been going on. The problem there, I can fully understand why they would be so angry. I've never experienced racism. I hope I've never displayed any racism. I can't say I haven't, but I hope that I haven't done. The problem that I see with all that rioting and setting fire to buildings and stuff like that is once you do that, you become as bad as the person that you're complaining against. You're not the right-wing media in the United States is going to focus more on the guy that throws a brick through a window than they are on why the guy's throwing the bricks through the window. Why are they so angry? All right, they're going to focus on that. And the other thing I was going to say is Trump. He is a malignant narcissist. The whole anything that happens is, why is this happening to me? So all these riots, he will be coming out with things that basically saying, why is this happening to me as the president? I've done such a wonderful job for all these people. I've got millions of black people that love me. So why are they doing this to me?
Because it's only 4 or 5%.
Yeah, but say he's a malignant narcissist. You called him a moron, and I've told you off before for denigrating morons by calling him one. He is exceptionally smart at manipulating people by playing to their pre-existing prejudices.
Yeah,
and he's a complete and utter hypocrite. He claims to love God, to be a Christian, and stuff like that. I doubt that I would imagine that the only time he's been in church in his life was when he was baptized, and when he got married those 4 times, or whatever the number was. I doubt that he's ever been in church other than that. And talking about him and the church and him being a hypocrite, it shows a thing that you can get from looking at the voting patterns in the United States. Something like 45% of the people are evangelical Christians. Believe that the earth was formed 6,000 years ago, and that Noah's flood was real, and neither of those are true.
Oh, right.
And he
Sorry, Avery, you burst my bubble then, mate.
You thought you were going to get away with it? With me not mentioning it when I'm talking about the United States.
That's right.
No such chance. 45% of them were evangelical Christians, and a huge amount of them voted for him because he said he was going to do certain things where he was playing straight into their prejudices, right? And so he's a master at doing that sort of thing. But the most important thing about him is that he's a malignant narcissist, and he is completely unfit to be the janitor in the White House cleaning the floors.
So I guess the thing that I need to explore with you is how has such. I'm always amazed that this country, which is suffers from all the flaws that one can imagine any country could suffer from, has developed the power and authority to become what they call themselves as the greatest nation on earth. And I keep thinking, well, what in the hell makes you the greatest anything? And why do you see yourselves as the greatest nation on earth when you have so many of these other issues that kind of permeate your everyday life and the way you conduct yourself, and the style of politics is a shambles. I mean, we look at our own country in the UK, and you can look at France and Germany and perhaps think kind of to some extent the same because they're politicians. But then when you have a look at the United States, you can't help but think that their system is also stuffed. They have this. We would never, in a parliamentary democracy, have a situation where a leader could run rampant as Trump does, and get away with it.
No, well, I mean, one of the problems in the United States is that the way the president is elected isn't through the popular vote. George W. Bush became president with a minority of the votes. John F. Kennedy had a very tiny majority of the votes, so he did win by a majority of the votes that were cast. Donald Trump got 3 million votes, or 3.5 million votes less than Hillary Clinton did, and yet he's president because they have an electoral college.
Yeah, so what idiot thought of that?
Oh, the
founding fathers were.
Yeah, the reason that the electoral college was introduced was to save the less populated areas being dominated by the most populated areas. So when the electoral college concept was introduced, on the East Coast there were millions of people living, not tens of millions or hundreds of millions, but millions. The vast majority of people lived in the cities along the East Coast. And then as the population was moving west, small towns were being set up, and the electoral college was meant to give them a better chance of a more equal representation, if you know what I mean. And it's because of the electoral college that a state like Montana or North Dakota is a better example, with 500,000 people, gets 2 senators, so 1 per 250,000 people. California gets 2 senators with a population of 40 million, so one senator is representing 20 million.
But the same is true in Australia, though.
No, because
yes, it is. How many senators do we have for each state?
We have 2 senators for each. No, it's not 2 senators. 6. We have 6 senators for each state, but
that's not dependent. But each state varies in size, does it not?
It does, and so the number of senators, I think, should reflect the size of the population in that state, whether it's here or in the United States.
But it doesn't, because we adopted the United States version of a Senate.
But when we adopted the United States version of a Senate, the person that wins is still the person that got the most votes. That's not how it works under the Electoral College.
Well, it's the person with the largest proportion.
Yeah, yeah. So a senator gets elected by having the largest number of first preference votes, with some second preference and possibly some third preference votes. But when you look at the distribution of it, it's It's the person who overall got the largest number of votes.
Yeah, and I think it was then time to talk
You,
about
you do get the
politics now.
oddities.
Politics at a different level now. But the whole purpose of the Senate was to give equal powers to the states, regardless of their population.
Yeah.
Or otherwise, you would wind up with the major states having all the say, and the poor old smaller states never having a chance to develop because they were overruled by the larger states.
And
So
even
that's
even
why
as
we have
things
to-
even as things are right now, there's two places in Australia where the federal government can say, "Oh, we don't like what you've done, and we're going to change that."
the territories.
Both of the territories.
Yeah, but that hopefully will change over time, I guess. But I guess
Yeah.
if we want to get back to our subject, which
Yep.
is the United States is stuffed, the reality is that as long as these, I don't like to call them riots, but as long as these objections are placed in relation to George Floyd and the murder and the inconsistencies and inequities that sit within their system that allows more African Americans to be abused, more African Americans to die at the hands of police than anybody else, then there will be a problem. And as long as they have a president who says, what did he say about rioting? What's the statement he made about shooting them? Rioting. Well, anyway, he made this statement, which was a 1967 statement by a right-wing governor in the US that says, if you riot, we'll shoot you.
Right,
You
George
riot
Wallace.
George Wallace was one of them.
Yeah.
There was somebody else as well. But I guess the issue is that at some particular point, somebody has to take control of this country, and I'm hoping as hell as it is. Now, look, the reason why I say that is, what's our interest in the US? Well, I personally don't have much, but I can tell you one thing. I do like Americans, and that I've been to the United States a couple of times. I found them very gracious, good people.
Yeah.
Really. And,
Yeah, in general.
well, no matter where you go, you're going to find your dickheads, aren't you?
Yeah, definitely.
So there
We
are
don't
some-
normally elect them, though.
No. Well, we have had Abbott, and we did have that guy from the Labor Party, whatever his name was, I've forgotten. So we do have them from time to time, but I'm hoping that at some particular point the American people come to understand that they can't continue this way because they also look foolish to the rest of the world.
They do. Before Trump came along, everybody looked to America for leadership.
Why?
Now, well, because they were the most powerful country, the richest country. The science and technology that came from the United States was superlative. It was. It's the United States that put a man on the moon. It's the United States that developed a lot of the vaccines that we've got nowadays. Often they developed things like Bluetooth.
They've had
Bluetooth.
45% of the people that have got the Nobel Peace Prize, have won Nobel Prizes have come from the US. And the other stat that is worth looking at on Planet America, incidentally, was that how they're talking about they're having so much a shot at the Chinese for importing so many students, and then those students, the right will argue, go back to the United States. Did you know that 95% of Chinese students remain in the United States?
I didn't know it was that large,
Yep.
but I'm not surprised.
And that they contribute. So they looked at all the technology degrees, engineering, mechanical, and so on. And they looked at all of those, and most of them, from 95 to 85% on each of those degrees, the Chinese people remain in the US. So the United States benefits from the number of people that they educate that are Chinese. So the notion that Chinese people are educated in the United States and then return back to China, taking with them all the knowledge and information that they've learned, is just crap.
Yeah, and I do know as well that in the of when you look at the religions there, the highest proportion of religious people who go on and get themselves a PhD in some scientific field is the Hindus, with something like 40 odd percent. The 40 odd percent of Hindus who go to university in the United States go right through to PhD, and most of them are either born there or have gone there, and then they stay. And
So-
the United States benefits from it.
So think about this for an idea, Avery, that you have a whole host of people who go to the US and I wonder whether the same thing's true in Australia, actually. But a whole lot of people go to the United States, gather a degree, wind up staying in the US because that's where the money is, actually. And the country benefits from their presence and what they develop in terms of the professions that they have. Now, I'm wondering, what about all those people that do social work, psychology, the humanities? Do they go back to China and bring back a Western way of thinking to the Chinese, which may be more damaging to the Chinese culture than otherwise might be? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. I wouldn't know what the proportion was, what percentage it was that went back, having studied things like that. I think that the Chinese system would, the system of government they got there, where basically they control every aspect of your life, would stifle somebody. I mean, if they're going to arrest a doctor who's issued a warning about a new virus that's been discovered, they're going to arrest him and then charge him with spreading rumors when all he's doing is stating facts. And if some Chinese student has earned a PhD in social science in the United States and then goes back to China, I don't think that the Chinese government would allow them to spread some liberal democracy ideas that
that's
they might
right.
pick up here.
Because the issue is that when Chinese students come to Australia or the US or any Western country for that matter, and they take on the Western values or a different value, and particularly when they start thinking about things constructively with a critical mind, then surely those skills that they learn in those areas would inform them about what's happening in their own country, and they would become a threat to those countries which are authoritarian in nature.
They would. But as I said, China would just crack down on them. I'm not convinced that
Well, we see what they're doing in Hong Kong right now. So
yeah.
we know
I'm not convinced that the Chinese government would allow a PhD from China, graduated in the United States, to go and spread words, spread the ideas of social democracy and things like that, or any democratic ideals into the US, into China, because it would disrupt the system, and the people that are in power don't want to give it up.
And there was a concern that students coming from China would be spying for the government. The reality is that if the student does spy, the student's not going to know all that much. You know, it's about those students finding other people that they could then coerce into spying for the government. So the students themselves are unable to do that. They don't have any power or authority or anything. So, and apparently that has happened. But there again, I wouldn't be surprised for one little moment if the CIA have done exactly the same thing in China.
I think it would be a lot harder for the CIA to do that sort of thing in China, because there's obvious differences when you look at the person. There's an awful lot of people of Chinese ancestry that live in the United States or in Britain or Australia. How many people of white Anglo-Saxon ancestry live in China?
Yeah, but that's not the point. The point is that you could have a Chinese American go back to China, and then do whatever they need to do in order to coerce them. So my point is that the CIA have been interfering in governments around the world for ever since the CIA became into effect, I guess. So nothing surprises. And the other thing too about America that surprises me is that they take the high ground on almost everything, as if they are, incredibly efficacious, or that they have the principles and values that stand above and are better than everybody else, and that's just so not true. You know what I mean? You have a look when you have a look at who they elected as their president. You do have to wonder about the values that they hold dear to them. If you elect a con man to the most,
you can expect to get conned.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't wonder about why he was elected. I don't wonder about it.
I guess I don't anymore either. Really.
Yeah, I don't wonder about it because he played to existing prejudices, right? With his all Mexicans are rapists, they're all drug dealers, right? It doesn't matter that it's not true. There was a lot of people believed it already. All black men are rapists. Not true, right? But a lot of people already believed it.
But what about this idea that he was going to drain the swamp, and all he's done is made the swamp bigger and dirtier than it ever was before?
Well, the way I put that is that he was going to drain the swamp, but all he's done is add more alligators to it.
No, he has.
It was again playing to a pre-existing belief in the United States that the United States government were all corrupt. We get the same thing here. You ask a lot of people, what do they think of the government? Oh, they're corrupt. They can't provide any evidence of corruption, but the government is corrupt because I don't like them. And in the United States, I think it's probably a lot truer in the United States because people like the Koch brothers, which I think is a highly appropriate name for those two.
Coke. It's actually Coke.
Oh, Coke, is it? Sorry. I thought I'd pronounced it correctly.
Because Koch brothers probably, only one of them's still alive now. One's died not long ago.
Yeah. But I think that's a more appropriate pronunciation for them. They spent something like $1 billion on the election for the people that they wanted to get elected, right? Who spends $1 billion to get, half a dozen people elected here? We did have who was it? Clive Palmer's party in 2018, 2019 had donations totaling $83 million. That was a complete waste of his money because he didn't get elected, right? But an awful lot of, because of the way the funding works in the United States, and an awful lot of people see all that money being spent on one politician, and they say it's corrupt. He's doing this because he's beholden to the big businesses and the billionaires that supported him.
Yeah, and I think there was a wonderful podcast on Chris Hayes from MSNBC does a podcast which I cannot remember the name of. Just need to search for Chris Hayes, I guess. But he did this wonderful podcast the other day on corruption in the US. And I guess, so he had somebody on who's pretty damn good in this area. And when you think about it, whenever anybody gives any funding, large amounts of funding, I'm not suggesting the $20 and $30 that mum and dad might give, but when corporations give money to any political party, aren't they asking for a favour?
Of course they are. And anybody who thinks that if a corporation or an individual gives millions and millions of dollars to one candidate, anyone who thinks that candidate is not going to be influenced by that person giving them millions and millions of dollars is deluded.
Yep. So wherever there's money in politics, it will lend itself to corruption.
Yeah.
And have a look at what do they call the people that advocate to politicians for
lobbyists?
Yeah, lobbyists. So look at lobbyists. Lobbying itself is a form of corruption. because it's about seeking favours from those people who have the power and authority to make decisions that are in the best interest of the lobbyist and their organisation.
Yeah, there's a difference, I think, between Joe Smith writing to his MP lobbying for something to be done to change, some.
Well, like we do in terms of Child Protection Party. Yeah.
Right. There's a difference between that because we're not getting paid to do that.
Well, there's nothing in it for us either.
Yeah.
There's no financial gain for us lobbying for children to be cared for and looked after and to be safe.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Nobody is paying us to do that. When a company goes and pays, they pay the lobbyist. The lobbyist is employed by a particular company, or a particular. It might be the union of. I don't mean that. Well, it could be a trade union, but you've got say all the coal mining companies in the United States group together, and then they employ lobbyists to go and try and influence politicians to vote to spend more money on coal mines and things like that.
Yeah. So any time any fund is spent or any corporation is seeking to provide funds to a political party, they are seeking for a reward for offering that money, and that is the definition of corruption.
Yeah.
So that's in Australian politics, which is something that I think we're going to do a feed on next week on. I think I suggested that, did I not? Corruption in Australian politics.
Yeah.
Tuesday we're going to be doing that on the Child Protection Party Facebook page. So this is an area which concerns me greatly because it is that form of corruption which leads to the worst possible decisions made for the general population. So the mum and dad aren't lobbying for some of the things around coals and other things, Sorry, my phone just went. The mum and dads aren't advocating for that. The corporations are. And, so we need to be able to make sure that social justice issues, which, who lobbies for social justice issues financially? I mean, NGOs don't do that because they don't have the funding.
Yeah.
So, so we've got organisations, I guess, advocating for Aboriginal rights and for human rights and Child Protection Party for children's rights. So we've got organisations that do that, but there is no financial benefit to them apart from making a fairer and more equitable society,
Yeah. Yeah, one of the thing you see me looking across for a moment, as you're aware, just recently we sent in a submission to the Federal Senate about the bill that I think it was Jackie Lambie put through about the Electoral Amendment Donation Reform and Other Measures Bill 2020. At the moment, there's no restriction of how much per year a person can donate to a party, or an organisation can donate to a political party, which is why, for example, in 2018-2019, mineralogy, I don't know, I've lost on that.
Mineralogical.
Yeah, Proprietary Limited donated $83 million to the United Australia Party. It was a complete waste of money because he wasn't elected, but individual could. That was a corporation that did that, but an individual, if they wanted to donate $1 million, Malcolm Turnbull in the 2 elections ago did exactly that. Was it 3 elections ago? But Malcolm Turnbull, when they just scraped through with that majority of 2 or whatever it was, he donated $1 million to the Liberal parties, and right now there's no legislation that prevents that.
Yes, but if I can tell you now, Avery, if I just happened to have a spare $1 million lying around, and I believed in the Child Protection Party as I do, I would donate the $1 million to the Child Protection Party.
Oh, yeah.
I guess the point is that it's about understanding the motive for the donation in the first place. That's the issue. If an individual wishes to donate money, I don't have as much. I do have a problem with that in some areas because clearly they're wanting something for it as well.
Yeah.
But if I donated, but if you're a corporation and you're donating that sort of money, then clearly you're asking for something for it. And then
Yeah.
there are those people that bet on both sides of the coin. You know, there
There
are
are.
those people that'll bet for both major parties and give the same amount to each of them, expecting their favours to be met because they don't know who's going to be in power.
Yeah. But either way, the amounts of money that that are permitted at the moment they're obscene. You know, to allow one person to donate $1 million or a corporation to donate $83 million in 1 year it's completely obscene, and
Yep.
it says to me that as I said, anybody that thinks that Mineralogy Proprietary Limited with their $83 million didn't expect something in return, right, is one of the reasons why people don't trust government.
And I
You know,
guess
why people think it's that governments are corrupt.
Well, that's right. And I think one of the issues that is a primary concern to me, and this conversation we started having about the United States, is that many of the issues that we see amplified in the US are also primary issues for us here in Australia, whether it be racism, whether it be money in politics, whether it be having a narcissistic, psychopathic leader of the country, which we haven't had for a few years, thank God.
Yeah.
But no matter what those issues are, that they're things that concern us all. And
Yeah.
as a world community, we need to be mindful too of the power and influence those sorts of people have that will determine. Like, did you know that Donald Trump's planning to get rid of the final treaty around non-proliferation?
Yes, I heard that.
So that Russia and other countries, China's not party to it anyway.
No.
But that Russia could then go forth and multiply around nuclear weapons.
Well, he did that with. He didn't continue the intermediate range ballistic missile thing treaty, and the first thing that Russia did was to step up and build some bigger and better ones.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
travel at
And-
hypersonic as well.
Well, so we assume. Well, we're not. I don't know whether there's definitely any proof that they've actually been able to do that.
Yeah.
Because they say that delivering a bomb in those particular travelling at those speeds apparently has its own issues.
Well, it does. There's no doubt about that. But if you can deliver something in a minute compared to 4 minutes, right, and what you're delivering is a 10 megaton nuclear warhead, you're much more likely to win that war than your opponent.
So I guess what we can say though is, thanks to the United States, as a world, we will be potentially in a worse position because
Definitely.
of their
I would say that.
ignorance. But on the other hand, as someone pointed out also recently, this may mean that Europe and parts of Asia, particularly Australasia, will then become more united together and have a united front at a completely different level than what we did. So our dependence upon the United States may diminish. Our trading with the US may change because we might be looking more towards China, Asia and Europe. So even though we could argue that the United States is stuffed, which is not a hard argument to make, I hasten to add, we may also be able to argue that, in fact, this may mean that we just need to change the way we think about the world.
Yeah. As far as Europe's concerned, after Britain committed suicide back in 2016, there's been lots of rumblings from other countries about doing the same in Europe, in the European Union, about doing exactly the same thing. Leave the EU. So I'm not convinced that people would be turning to the EU itself, because if it breaks up, then it's just another 28 countries where we would have to deal with them individually. Right now, we could negotiate a trade deal with a region that's got something like the equivalent population of the United States.
Yeah, but and look, I don't know much about the EU and how that actually. I mean, I understand they have their own government and stuff, and I get all of that. But you know, when a region is feeling threatened, they will bind together anyway, regardless of whether there's something like the EU or some other form of agreement. There are often agreements that bind countries together based on their own best interest.
Yeah.
And if one of those interests is a threat they have from somewhere like the Russian Union, then my guess is they'll join together regardless whether they're part of the EU or not.
Yeah. And excuse me. Yeah, you'd expect that to happen, but do you want to rely upon that happening?
Well, I guess it's about developing resources, isn't it? So it's not just about coal, oil and gas. It's about military resources as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, I guess if you're all bound together, you'll have kind of the one direction in which you can tug, as opposed to a whole lot of different varying directions that you want to go. So, yeah, and I think just want to, before we close, I just want to come back to the United States is stuffed, because it is a terminology which I think, I was going to use another word apart from stuffed, I want you to know, but I chose stuffed because it was probably more acceptable to the general population than the other word that started with an F. So I think that it's important for all of us to understand the troubling times that we're in, not just because of the COVID-19 virus, but also because as a nation here in Australia and as a world, we're heading into territory which, even though we've dabbled in the past in a big way in terms of racism, we're back there again. And it just disturbs me, Avery, that we'll never be able to have the courage to move beyond, because there will always be a group of people who feel powerless, helpless and hopeless just because they are white and that a lot of other people are black or another coloured skin.
Yeah. I mean, I lived in Hong Kong, so a white face in Hong Kong was a minority. I've lived in a couple of other countries where white faces were in a minority, and I never once felt threatened in those places. I didn't have people coming up to me and saying, "You're white, you're trash." Right? You get people whose ancestors have been here for 60-odd thousand years are treated as though they were dirt. It disgusts me. One of the reasons I wanted to come and live in this country was because I was so fascinated by Aboriginal culture.
Yeah,
I still am.
And so we should be. And we all should be. It's a fabulous
Absolutely.
culture.
Every single one of us. The other thing I was going to say, you've got people who are, they're a minority in a country, and they get treated like they don't matter because there's so few of them. Aboriginal people here, what, 500 million, is it? Something like that? I'm not sure.
They're only 0.2% of the population, though.
Okay, so a very small percentage of the population, and they get treated like crap.
Or 2%, 2%, I should say.
They're treated like they don't belong here, which disgusts me. And in the United States, the African Americans treated like they don't belong there. They didn't. A lot of them, their ancestors didn't choose to go there. Right? They didn't go there for a better life. They went there because they were kidnapped, chained up in the holds of tiny little ships, where a lot of them died on the journey across the Atlantic, and sold to rich white people to work the cotton fields. And there's an awful lot of people in the United States still think that that's all they're fit for. There's a guy, his name was, I think it was Dwayne Gish, who said that the mind of a black man is only fit for servile and mundane matters. Guess what he is?
What?
He's an evangelical Christian.
Oh, right. Well, I was glad to know that you brought us back to that, Avery. That's.
Well, I had to. You're talking about the United States. So when you're talking about the United States, you can't avoid the impact that religion has on the U.S. society, and in some ways it's good, but in a lot of ways it's extremely negative.
Well, they actually were responsible, I guess, for the election of the
Donald Trump.
They now have in there. I just reminded me when you were talking about this. We'll just close with this though. Was that when Dee and I were in the US, which would have been about 5 years ago, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. We were in New York, and I was staying with my sister and brother-in-law, and we said, Dee and I said, well, look, they lived only a few blocks from Harlem, right? So Dee and I said, well, never been to Harlem, heard a lot about it, so let's catch a bus. So we caught a bus, which was only went short distance, really, and suddenly we found ourselves in Harlem. It was really difficult to find a white person there. We were probably appeared to be the only ones, but no point did we ever feel afraid.
No.
It was
the picture that's painted by an awful lot of Americans, a lot of Australians as well, is if your skin is white, you are dangerous. If your skin is not white, you are dangerous, and it's simply not true.
Yes, they did. They've done some psychological tests in relation to that, just by holding up pictures of different people, different races, and whatever, and that the heart rate and other functions in the body increase when they see a black person, as opposed to. And so that's just a picture. You don't know anything about the person.
Yeah,
it's just a picture. So there's something culturally, and it's not innate because it's bred in us. So we're not born with it.
Born racist. Nobody.
No. But there's certainly something in the culture that tells us that that's the way either black people are perpetrated in movies and in news items and so on. That is dangerous. It's extremely dangerous.
I mean, I remember in the 1950s in a movie from the United States, a black woman was a maid. Right? She was never an office executive. White women were typists, and they were waitresses and things like that. She was never an office executive. She was never the CEO of an organisation.
And I think in
the 1950s I can't remember her name, but Carla Fiorina, who ran for president when.
Carla Fiorina, yeah.
When the Marmalade Marmoset got elected that year, Carla Fiorina was the CEO of HP.
That's right.
People that make the computer I'm sitting in front of right now, and that was unthinkable in the 1950s and 60s. Women went to work to find a husband, preferably a rich one. That was the whole thing. That was, in so many movies and TV programs. That's all that they were there for.
Yeah, but also 15 years ago, it was thought impossible that a black person could be a president as well.
Yeah, and he turned out to be one of the best that they ever had.
That's right. So I guess that's
right now is about 80%.
Pepin?
His popularity rating at the moment is still about 80%.
Yeah, and I'm in love with his wife, to be honest.
Yeah, me too.
We watched. She's done there's a fabulous documentary done on her, based on her book, which is on Netflix. So anybody who gets a chance to watch this fabulous conversation between Avery and myself, check Netflix out, because it's a fabulous documentary. Because we do acknowledge and we do recognise when there are good people, do we not?
Yeah. And there's good people from all races, ethnicities, religions. Doesn't matter. Straight, gay, Christian, atheist, Muslims,
right.
Doesn't matter. There's good people everywhere, and it's the minorities. By minority, I'm not mean.
You mean the lesser number?
The lesser number.
Not the racial number.
I'm not referring to the minority of a particular ethnic background. Just the minority of people in general are the ones that cause trouble. For the majority of that ethnicity, if you know what I mean.
Yep, I do. And I think that, I guess what this conversation has helped me to understand is that we still need to do a lot of work.
Yep.
We need to work on each other to help each other understand with each other. But we need to, if you say something that's offensive, I need, as your mate, to be able to say to you, look, Avery, I really find that offensive.
Yeah.
And that you need to think about. That's what I'm saying. We work on each other.
Yeah.
So we need to challenge each other about the things that we say or do. It's like we need to challenge each other about the way we think about women.
Yeah.
And, if we say something or do something that is offensive, then we need to let that person know that's offensive and it needs to change.
Yeah.
So
The one thing to be careful with there is that if you say something to me, right, and I might just brush it off. I don't care. It's just Tony being Tony, for example. This person over
which
here,
I am most of the time, incidentally.
yeah. But you say something to me which is just water off a duck's back. This person over here can't take offence at you for what you said to me because I didn't care. Do you know what I mean?
If I'm addressing you,
Yeah.
and someone next to you is offended by me, the way I address you in relation to that issue, yeah, sure, then they need to come and have a chat to me about what I said that they found offensive.
Do they?
I don't know. It's up to them.
Say, for example, every other word that you were using began with F, and they find that offensive because they happen to be sitting in the same room. That's one thing. If you made a personal attack on me and I just shrug it off, right? They don't need to say anything because I didn't say anything about it, right? Do you know what I mean? I'm the one that you don't give offence, you take offence.
Well, that's right, but
Right.
if that person raised that issue with me, I'd ask them to check out with you as to whether you found it offensive.
Well, what they should do, I think, is check out with me. Weren't you offended by that?
That's right. That's what I
And
said.
if I say yeah, and they say, well, I'll go and deal with it. I say, no, you don't. I'll deal with that. It's not up to somebody else to deal with a potential offence against me. It's up to me to deal with it.
No, but it's up to them to deal with it if they found it offensive with the person with whom they are offended.
No, I think we're going to have to agree to disagree there because...
No, if I say something that's offensive to you,
Yeah.
and you tell me that it's offensive and why, and I was
That's one thing.
oblivious to that reason,
Yeah.
then it's up to me to make a decision as to whether I choose to be offensive in that manner to you again. Isn't it?
Yeah. But what I'm saying is, it's you and me. You say something I find offensive and I deal with it. It's not up to that person over there to deal with it with you. To go and say, Avery found that offensive.
No, because I agree with you.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Because if you haven't told them that you found it offensive, how would they know that it was offensive to you?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Which is why we need to get rid of 18C.
I don't disagree with you, and I'm not too sure that we need to get rid of 18C. That's another issue for another debate at another time.
Yeah.
Just letting everybody know out there that Avery and I don't always agree with each other.
We certainly don't.
So, but Avery,
Nuclear power.
what? Nuclear power. Yeah.
Nuclear power.
I know the jury's still out as far as I'm concerned.
I'll persuade you.
But no, he won't. That's the third thing we've got to disagree with, or the fact that he can persuade me. Thanks, Avery. Thanks for being with us.
You're welcome.
And I just want to thank everybody else that did tune into this. We will be sharing this page on Facebook and in other places. And we hope that if you have a comment, please put it down below. And if you wish to contact Avery or myself, please do so. You can find our numbers elsewhere. It's fantastic being with you today. It ran a bit longer than we thought. It's nearly an hour. We chatted about something we didn't know what we were going to talk about, which is normal. I hope that you found some of it interesting and challenging, and we'll catch up with you soon. Goodbye, everybody.